So I've already covered a lot of things. There's no way I can go back and cover everything. But this is where Elijah called the prophets of Baal to a showdown on Mount Carmel. And he said, you choose 2 animals, you pick which one you want, you put wood under it and you kill the animal and get everything ready, but don't put any fire on it. And then I'll take 1 animal and I'll get an altar ready, and then we won't put any fire to it. We'll just ask the true God to let fire come down from heaven, and the one who can answer by fire, let him be the true God. And he gave the prophets of Baal, there was 450 prophets of Baal, 400 prophets of the grove, a total of 850 prophets for Baal. And he let them go first, and they went from early in the morning until the evening sacrifice, nearly 12 hours, maybe 9 to 12 hours. And let them, and they cut themselves, they jumped on the altar, they did everything, nothing happened. He even mocked them. And finally, he just prayed a real simple prayer, made it clear that he had done this because God had instructed him to do it. And then he asked for the fire of God to fall. And here in 1 Kings chapter 18, let me read this again. It says in verse 38, then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt sacrifice and the wood and the stones and the dust. In other words, wood burns, but stones and dust don't normally burn. Plus, he had drenched all of this in water. This was such an intense fire. It must have been something like a lightning bolt or something hit this, and it burnt the stones, the dust, licked up the water that was in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces, and they said, the Lord, He is the God. The Lord, He is the God. That's where we ended yesterday. That's powerful. But that's not the end of the story. It goes on to say in verse 40, it says, and Elijah said unto them, take the prophets of Baal, let not one of them escape. And they took them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon, and slew them there. And Elijah said unto Ahab, get thee up, eat and drink, for there is the sound of abundance of rain. If you go all the way back to the 17th chapter, this had been 3.5 years. In the book of James, James talked about that Elijah prayed and it didn't rain for the space of 3.5 years. So that's the only time it tells us this amount of time. And so for this 3.5 years, there hadn't been rain or even dew. Now that he had seen the entire nation turn to the Lord, Elijah is getting ready to release rain and call rain back and end this drought. And so he told Ahab to get up because there is the sound of abundance of rain. As you read the rest of these verses, we'll be going through this in just a second. There wasn't even a cloud in the sky. And yet Elijah was saying, get up, for there is a sound of abundance of rain. So in verse 42, so Ahab went up to eat and to drink, and Elijah went up to the top of Carmel, and he cast himself down upon the earth and put his face between his knees. And he said to his servant, go up now, look towards the sea. And he went up and looked and said, there is nothing. And he said, go again 7 times. So the very first time he looked, there was nothing. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. Did you know that this, for most people, the way that they pray, if they pray and ask God for something, and if they just don't immediately see it, then they just get into doubt about, I don't know why God hadn't done this. You know, I don't completely understand everything, but I know in the 9th chapter of the book of Daniel that Daniel prayed a prayer, and in 3 minutes he saw an answer. But in the 10th chapter, he prayed for 3 weeks before he saw an answer. And when the answer came, they said it was because of a demonic opposition. Sometimes Satan can hinder a prayer, and people just naively think that, well, God, if He wants to do something, it's just like that. There's nothing that can hinder Him. Well, it hindered Him in the 9th and the 10th chapter of the book of Daniel. And right here, we know that it was God's will to send this rain, and yet He prayed, and 7 times He sent His servant, and there wasn't anything. But He didn't quit. Matter of fact, this is the exact instance that's being quoted over in James chapter 5, where it's talking about perseverance, that the effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. And then it talks about Elijah, how that he prayed. It says he prayed once, and yet this says that he sent his servant 7 times. Which was it? It's both. It was just one prayer, but he stuck with it until he saw results. Boy, that's profound right there. Again, there's people that just pray and they throw a prayer up and they just expect it to, if it's God's will, it'll just instantly happen. They don't stick with it until they see results. But Elijah, he kept with it, sent his servant 7 times, and finally in verse 44 it says, "And it came to pass at the 7th time that he said, Behold, there ariseth a little cloud out of the sea like a man's hand." You know, I've been on Mount Carmel. I've been to this exact spot. And I remember standing there and looking out over the Mediterranean Sea, and there was a cloud about the size of a man's hand. It was just exactly like this. And I was looking at that and thinking, man, how in the world could that produce a deluge that's described right here? But man, that's all Elijah needed. He didn't have to see the full thing, just to see a breakthrough, to see a cloud the size of a man's hand. And he said, "Go up, say unto Ahab, Prepare thy chariot, get thee down, that the rain stop thee not." And it came to pass in the meanwhile that the heaven was black with clouds and wind, and there was a great rain. And Ahab rode and went to Jezreel. And the hand of the Lord was upon Elijah, and he girded up his loins and ran before Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel. That means he beat Ahab to Jezreel. If you go from Mount Carmel to Jezreel, it's over 20 miles. Did you know that Ahab had a chariot? But Elijah was so pumped after calling fire down from heaven, seeing the entire nation turn to the Lord, seeing all the prophets of Baal killed, and then seeing this rain come. He was so fired up that he outran a chariot for 20 miles and beat Ahab to Jezreel. Man, that's awesome. You would think that after this, the rest of Elijah's life would just be perfect. The next chapter shows one of the saddest chapters in Elijah's life. Man, he messed up big time. And there's a lesson to learn from this, that once you experience a great victory, did you know you're really vulnerable? Because you get to where you drop your guard. You know, when you are under pressure and fighting and there's opposition, you know that, man, you've got to be seeking the Lord. You got to be on your best behavior. You got to be looking and things like this. But when everything is successful, people tend not to be as diligent seeking the Lord. Most people only seek the Lord when they're in trouble. After Elijah had these tremendous things happen, he let his guard down, and because of it, he wound up running and literally asking God to kill him. So in chapter 19, verse 1, it says, "And Ahab told Jezebel," that's the king, told his wife Jezebel, "all that Elijah had done, and withal how he had slain all of the prophets with the sword." And there was special mention made that these 850 prophets all ate at Jezebel's table. These were people that they were her priest. She was closely connected to these people. And when she heard it, she got mad. Verse 2, it says, "Then Jezebel sent a messenger unto Elijah, saying, So let the gods do to me, and more also, if I make not thy life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time." So Jezebel, the queen, sent a messenger with a note saying that she was going to kill him. You know, I mentioned this earlier on one of my broadcasts, but if she had really had the power to kill him, she wouldn't have sent a messenger with a note. She'd have sent a soldier with a sword. The entire nation had turned to the Lord over here, and it says that they said, "The Lord, He is the God." The entire nation, there was a revival sweeping this nation. The people had turned away from Baal and to God. And if Jezebel would have killed Elijah, there possibly could have been such a revolt that she would have been killed, her husband would have been killed. She could not do it. I don't doubt that she wanted him dead, but she couldn't do it, or she would have just done it. She was threatening him. This was intimidation. And this is what the devil does to us. There is no doubt that the devil hates us. There's no doubt that he goes about seeking whom he may devour, that he comes to steal, to kill, and destroy. But he cannot do it without our consent and cooperation. Satan is all mouth and no real power. This is a great example of it right here. She wanted him dead. She was trying to intimidate him. And the sad truth is, it worked. And again, Elijah just kind of let his guard down. For 3.5 years, he had been stronger than horseradish, had done all of these great things, but now he fled from a woman with a note. Did you know he had stood up to the king and all of his soldiers and all the prophets of Baal? He had stood up to the armies, but he was running now from a woman. In verse 3 it says, and when he saw that, when he saw what? She said, so be it if I make not your life like the life of one of these prophets by this time tomorrow. What was the life of those prophets like? If you go back into the 18th chapter, Elijah killed all of those prophets. 850 prophets. This is bound to be a gory sight, to just literally kill all of these prophets. The blood had to have probably been all over him, all over anybody who was helping him kill these prophets. It was a tragic sight to see 850 people put to death. And it says when he saw that, when he saw himself like one of them. This was a graphic image that was etched in his mind. And he saw those dead prophets. And when she challenged him, he saw himself dead. Did you know it doesn't matter how other people see you? It's how you see yourself.
Andrew will be right back after these messages.
I'd like to encourage you to take advantage of our daily devotion. This is something I wrote many years ago. I have a different devotion for every single day of the year. And I read these often, and I'm amazed at some of the things the Lord said through me. They're really, really good. And I believe it would bless you. So you can get this sent to you automatically. I encourage you to go to our website and sign up and get our daily devotion for every single day of the year.
And now, here's Andrew.
You know, in the 13th chapter of the book of Numbers, Moses sent the spies out, and the spies, all of the spies saw the exact same thing. But 10 of the 12 spies said, we can't do it, because they saw the giants, and they said that we were like grasshoppers in their sight. And they said, and so were we in our own sight. It's one thing what the giants think of you, but it's another thing what you think of yourself. The giants looked at them like grasshoppers, but the sad fact is 10 of those 12 spies looked at themselves as grasshoppers. And the moment they did that, they were defeated. They couldn't enter into the promised land. But Joshua and Caleb, they stood up and said, no, they're meat for us. This is great. They got giant houses. This is a great thing. They saw the positive side of it. But the majority listened to the 10 spies network and went with them. And because of it, it cost them 40 years in the wilderness. When Elijah saw himself dead because of Jezebel's threat, that's when he lost it. And it says, when he saw that, he arose and went for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongeth to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a juniper tree, and he requested for himself that he might die. In other words, he wasn't going to kill himself. Suicide's not a godly thing. But he, in a sense, was asking for the same thing. Instead of him killing himself, he asked God to kill him. And he went on and said, because it is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am not better than my fathers. Do you know, this is a key insight into Elijah and into his failure in this situation. The reason he failed is because he had thought he was better than his fathers. Did you know nobody else had ever called for a drought like this? Nobody else had ever raised a person from the dead, like in the 17th chapter. Nobody else had ever called fire down from heaven like this. Nobody else had ever killed the prophets of Baal like he had done. Nobody else had ever ended a drought the way that he had done. Nobody else had outrun a chariot for over 20 miles. This guy had a string of successes that basically it made him think he was better than his fathers. But right here, he's saying, oh God, take away my life, kill me, because I'm not better than my fathers. He realized that he was running from a woman with a note when he had done all of these other great things. And this shows you why he failed in this instance, because the scripture says, Proverbs 16:18, pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. The moment you get to looking at yourself and the things that God does through you, and you get to taking credit for and saying, look what I have done, you're done. You know, I remember when we were building our auditorium over here, and it's I think it's a 120,000 square foot building. And before it was finished, we had the roof on, but there was still the steel that was exposed and stuff. And we went up, and I took the city officials and the mayor and stuff, and they were looking around. And the mayor, this was a mayor that was real friendly to us. The one we have right now doesn't like me. But this was a very friendly person. Anyway, he looked at all of this, and he was so impressed. And he said, you must be so proud. And I told him, I said, proud's not the right word. That would imply that I've done this. I said, I haven't done this. This is what God told me to do, and I'm just holding on for dear life. I feel like a person in a roller coaster, that I'm not running the thing. I'm just strapped in and holding on for dear life and enjoying the ride. And I gave the glory to God for it. And I said, man, I'm not smart enough to do this. This is not my doing. But the moment you get to looking at something and think, look what I have done. This is like the person, I think it's the 12th chapter of the book of Luke, where the man had so much crop that he had to tear down his barns and build newer ones. And he said, look at what I have done. Look at all that I have done. And there was a voice that came from heaven and says, your life is taken from you. And he was killed that very night. And the moment you go to start taking credit, you are in Satan's territory. Satan uses your pride as a beachhead, a landing zone, a foothold in your life. And you've got to guard against this. And so Elijah had nothing but these successes, and because of it, it got him to thinking he was awesome. And he was just sitting there relishing in, look what I have done. And then a note scared him so bad that he ran for his life. Did you know that there was a great revival going on in Israel? The entire nation had turned to God, and the preacher that was supposed to be preaching the revival was running the opposite direction. You know, the scripture doesn't go on and say what happened in the nation, but the lack of talking about how the nation turned back to God would leave you with the impression that this revival just died out. I mean, the entire nation had turned to the Lord, saying, the Lord, He is the God. They had forsaken Baal. They were ripe for the picking if somebody would have been there to tell them and to preach and to see things change. But the man who was anointed by God to preach the revival was running for his life. And because of it, he was so ashamed, so disappointed with himself, that he asked God to kill him. And I'm just running out of time here, so I'm just going to summarize some things rather than read this. But finally, the Lord told him, an angel appeared, and there was some food there, and He said, eat this food because the journey's too great for you. So he ate until he literally couldn't eat anymore, and he went back to sleep. And the angel came and told him to get up and go to Mount Sinai. And he went in the strength of that food for 40 days and 40 nights. Implying that he went without eating for 40 days and 40 nights and traveled all the way to Mount Horeb. And then he had an encounter with the Lord, and the Lord came and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? You know, if you were listening to this teaching, in the 17th chapter, the Lord said, I have commanded the ravens to feed thee there. That's the reason that I have this product called Your Place Called There. And it was when he went there and that he experienced God's provision. But now he wasn't where he was supposed to be. And the Lord says, what are you doing here, Elijah? You're supposed to be there. You're supposed to be in Israel. You're supposed to be preaching this revival. All of these people that turned to the Lord. And Elijah gave a real feeble answer. And he says, I'm the only one left. I've torn down your altars. I've killed the prophets of Baal. I've been faithful. But I'm the only one left. And as I said earlier in one of my teachings over in 1 Kings chapter 18, Obadiah told him, no, there's 100 prophets left. I've been hiding them in a cave and feeding them with bread and water for 3.5 years. So Elijah knew that what he was saying wasn't true. But did you know when you get depressed, most people aren't going by what they know to be true. They're going by feelings. They're letting their feelings control them. And when you do that, you have this Elijah syndrome, and I guarantee you it's not going to work well. And so the Lord came and asked him a second time. And he said, Elijah, what are you doing here? And he gave the same answer. Did you know if God asked you the same question twice, it's because you probably didn't answer it correctly the first time. It's like if you take a test in school and they say you need to retake this test. Don't give the same answers or you're going to get the same results. But Elijah, he just said, I'm the only one left serving you. And so I'm just running out of time, so I'll summarize. But the Lord spoke to him not in a spectacular way. He had the wind come, the earthquake come, a fire come, but God wasn't in any of these flashy displays. God spoke to him in a still small voice and asked him, what are you doing here? And he gave that same answer. And so the Lord told him to go anoint Elisha to be his successor. And here's my way of interpreting all of this. You can read it in the 19th chapter. He asked him what he was doing. If he would have given a different answer, I believe he would have gotten a different results. But basically what happened when he said that I'm the only one, and he just refused to humble himself, and he was still promoting that he was doing something that nobody else had done, God told him to go get a replacement. And he told him to go separate. He told him to do three things. He told him to anoint Hazael king of Syria, Jehu king of Israel, and Elisha to replace him. He never did the first two things. He only anointed his replacement, basically showing that he was ready to quit. And it was Elisha that later anointed Hazael and anointed Jehu. So anyway, Elijah did eventually recover from this, and in 2 Kings chapter 2, he actually got translated into heaven and never died. He just got caught up into heaven. But this was a major failure on his part. And this book would go into all of the details and show you a lot more things about this. Today's going to be my last day to teach on this, so I'm not going to finish teaching about Elijah, but I'd encourage you to get this book, the CDs, DVDs, USB, or a study guide. And then I have this little booklet that is just a brief summary of 1 Kings chapter 17, and it's about your place called there. Today's my last day to make any of these products available here on television. So please listen to our announcer and please respond today. I promise you this teaching would be a blessing to you. So call or write and receive these materials today.